Most men believe infidelity means something broke, that the emotional connection failed, that love died first and betrayal followed. They're wrong about the sequence. I've sat across from men who were asked a direct question: "Do you love your wife?" They answer yes without hesitation. Then comes the obvious follow-up: "So why are you having an affair?" And the response is almost identical every time: "Why wouldn't I?" That answer sounds defensive. It sounds like avoidance. But it's not. It's the actual internal logic. There's the assumption men make about other men that doesn't hold. They assume infidelity operates like a binary switch. Either the relationship works or it doesn't. Either he's satisfied or he's not. Either he loves her or he's looking elsewhere. This model feels intuitive because it mirrors how men think about most decisions. If something isn't working, you replace it. If it is working, you keep it. But that's not how the mechanism operates. And the confusion starts when men apply that logic backward. When a man finds out another man cheated, the first assumption is, he must not have been happy. He must not have loved her. Something must have been missing. That assumption breaks the moment you ask the man directly. What's actually happening is a separation that most men don't anticipate. The emotional bond and the sexual behavior aren't governed by the same system. One doesn't regulate the other. They can run in parallel without interfering. A man can feel deep attachment, admiration, loyalty, and still act outside the relationship without those feelings dimming. This is where the first major misread happens. Men interpret behavior through outcome. If he cheated, the bond must have been weak. If the bond was strong, he wouldn't have cheated. The logic is clean. It's also wrong. From a psychological standpoint, this separation isn't pathological. It's structural. The part of male psychology that experiences emotional connection doesn't automatically suppress the part that responds to sexual opportunity. These systems overlap in some areas, but they don't control each other. When men assume they do, they misread both themselves and other men. Now, I need to pause here because this is the point where the typical response is, "That's just an excuse. That's rationalization. That's a man refusing to take responsibility for what he wants." And I'm not dismissing that interpretation. I'm saying it misses the mechanics. Men often describe relationships in terms of satisfaction. "She makes me happy. We communicate well. I have no complaints." When that's true, the assumption is, why would he risk it? The answer men expect is, he wouldn't. But that assumes risk is being calculated the way they think it is. It's not. Let me reframe this from a different angle. Think about how men describe moments of clarity in relationships. They'll say things like, "I realized I didn't want to lose her," or "I recognized how much she meant to me." Those moments happen after behavior, not before it. The behavior occurs first. The realization that the behavior could have cost something comes later. This delay is critical. It means the decision to cheat isn't happening in the presence of the thing being risked. It's happening in the absence of immediate consequence. The bond isn't being weighed in real time. It's not part of the equation until after the fact. Now, this creates a question men struggle with. If the bond is real, how does the behavior not register as a threat to it? The answer isn't that men don't care. It's that the threat doesn't activate in the moment. The mechanism that generates attachment and the mechanism that responds to sexual novelty don't communicate efficiently. One runs without consulting the other. This is why conversations after infidelity often go in circles. The man says, "I love you, I don't know why I did it." The partner hears that as contradiction. It is a contradiction, but only if you assume both things are regulated by the same system. If they're not, then both can be true simultaneously without one canceling the other. Here's the part that disrupts the standard narrative. Most relationship models assume that emotional closeness functions as a deterrent. The closer you feel, the less likely you are to jeopardize it. That logic works for decisions that involve visible trade-offs. If I do this, I lose that. The cost is clear. But sexual opportunity doesn't present itself with visible trade-offs attached. The bond isn't standing next to the opportunity, asking to be weighed. It's somewhere else entirely. The man isn't thinking, if I do this, I might lose her. He's thinking, this doesn't affect that. The confusion intensifies because men often describe their relationships positively before, during, and after infidelity. There's no shift in how they talk about the partner, no complaints, no dissatisfaction, no emotional distance. The relationship wasn't deteriorating. Nothing felt broken. This makes the behavior look random. It's not random, it's just operating on a separate track. The recognition that the bond was at risk usually happens later, after the fact, after the guilt shows up, after the possibility of exposure becomes real. That's when the systems connect. That's when the consequence becomes visible. But in the moment of decision, that connection isn't there. So when men assume that infidelity signals a weak bond, they're working backward from outcome to motive. They're assuming the bond was tested and failed. But the bond wasn't tested. It wasn't part of the decision framework. The behavior happened in a psychological space where the bond wasn't being referenced. This isn't about justification. This is about sequence. Men assume that emotional attachment acts as an override, that if the bond is strong enough, the behavior won't happen. But the override isn't automatic. It has to be activated. And it doesn't activate unless the threat is perceived in real time. Now, here's where the internal logic becomes visible. When men are asked why they cheated and they respond with, "Why wouldn't I?" they're not being flippant. They're describing the absence of an internal stop signal. The question isn't, "Why did you betray the bond?" The question is, "What would have stopped me?" And if the answer is, "Nothing was there to stop me," that reveals something about how the system works. The bond doesn't function as a constant restraint. It functions as a consequence men recognize after the behavior, not during it. This creates a cognitive problem for men trying to predict other men. If you assume that cheating signals relationship failure, you're going to misread situations where the relationship is stable. You're going to assume dissatisfaction where there isn't any. You're going to search for problems that don't exist. The actual predictor isn't dissatisfaction. It's opportunity combined with an absence of immediate perceived consequence. That's the variable, not the strength of the bond, not the quality of the relationship, not the level of satisfaction. Men expect internal conflict before betrayal. They expect the bond to assert itself, to create hesitation, to generate guilt in advance. When that doesn't happen, they assume the bond wasn't real. But the bond is real. It just doesn't activate at the point of decision. It activates afterward. This is why men who cheat often describe the behavior as impulsive, as something that happened without deliberation. They're not lying. The deliberation they're describing, the part where they weigh the bond against the opportunity, didn't occur. The behavior bypassed that process entirely. The dissonance comes later, after the behavior, after the moment passes. That's when the bond reasserts itself. That's when the guilt appears. That's when the question becomes, why did I do that? But by then, the behavior already happened. The recognition of risk arrives too late to prevent the action. So when men operate under the assumption that infidelity equals lovelessness, they're importing a logic that doesn't match the timing. They're assuming the bond was evaluated and rejected. It wasn't. It wasn't part of the calculation. This pattern repeats across situations. Stable relationships, unstable relationships, relationships men describe as fulfilling, relationships men describe as strained. The common variable isn't the relationship quality, it's the structure of how the decision happens. What men misread is the role of real-time perception. The bond exists, the attachment is real, but neither one generates an automatic stop signal unless the man perceives immediate consequence. And in most cases of infidelity, that perception isn't there. The consequence is abstract, future, hypothetical, not immediate. The bond becomes real again after the behavior, when the guilt sets in, when the possibility of discovery appears, when the man realizes what he put at risk. But in the moment of decision, the bond isn't loud enough to override the opportunity. This is what makes the "why wouldn't I" response so revealing. It's not defiance, it's the absence of an internal argument. The bond didn't present itself as a reason not to. The relationship didn't activate as a restraint. The man moved through the decision without those things registering. And this is the part that shifts how you interpret male infidelity. It's not a referendum on the relationship. It's not proof of emotional disconnection. It's not evidence of dissatisfaction. It's a structural feature of how male psychology processes opportunity in the absence of immediate consequence. Once that separation is visible, the standard explanations stop working. The bond isn't weak, the love isn't gone, the relationship isn't failing. The mechanism just operates on a different logic than men assume it does. From here, behavior doesn't reverse, it clarifies. What looked like contradiction becomes consistent. What felt like betrayal starts to look like exactly what it is: a decision made in a psychological space where the bond wasn't part of the equation.